Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm really excited to bring you guys this video on flashlights and Dead by Daylight. This is going to be a tutorial guide where we're going to teach you everything there is to know. We're going to be starting out at the very basics and talking about the very basic mechanics and cores to how flashlights even work. We're going to get into strategies around it, times to use it, when to not use it. We're going to talk about the add-ons as well as the timings for flashlight saves, for pickups, as well as a lot of other things. So let's hop right in and get started. Okay, so to start out, we're going to start with the very basics. If you're a more experienced player, this might all seem pretty silly to listen to because you probably already know most of this, but I want to make sure we cover all grounds, and a lot of this basic information is going to tie into the more advanced stuff later on, so it's important to really know the fundamentals of how things work. So, to start out, the very most basic of all, to blind a killer, you point the flashlight at their face, and after 1 second of holding it, they become blind. This is what it looks like from the killer side. It basically just turns your whole vision into this, and it lasts about 2 seconds by default with no add-ons. So after about 2 seconds, it slowly fades away. The actual hitbox as far as blinding is his face, but it's also pretty generous. If you go a little bit around it, like, you can still get the blind. You can see in the video right now that I'm showing you that you don't have to be exactly on it perfectly. It's also important to know that the beam will actually tighten if you're getting the blind, so you can see a visual sort of feedback that you're getting the blind. If the beam is not tightening, then you know that you're not getting the blind, but if you do see it tighten, then you know that it's working. I want to also throw out there that the easiest way to tell that you're getting the actual blind is you can see the little 400 blood point thing pop up on the left that says killer blind. That'll pop up when you actually get the blind, so that's how you can confirm it and know that you actually blinded the killer if you're new. Also, in order to blind the killer, you have to be standing in front of them and their FOV. You have to be in the cone of their FOV in front of them. Meaning if you're too far to the side, the blind won't work. You have to be generally in front of them. And it's supposed to be based off of the killer field of view. You're like, whatever you can see as killer is where you're supposed to be blinded from and nothing else. But if you play the game, you notice that sometimes you get blinded from just barely out of your field of view, which does happen sometimes. There's a little bit of a gray spot where you can be out by a little bit and get blinded. So that exists, but it's not very significant. But because of this, perks that increase your FOV like Shadowborn and Modern Abuse actually make the blind angle slightly bigger. If you notice here on the left, this is where the blind angle is on Shadowborn, and on the right is the blind angle of a no perk killer. The flashlight actually has a pretty decent range too. You can see here by standing at the corner of shack, and I inch up to see when I can get the blind. It's pretty much the entire length of the shack wall, which is a pretty decent range. I think it's also good to keep in mind as well that the flashlight is a cone, so the closer you are to the killer, the more exactly perfectly accurate you have to be to get the blind. So generally speaking, if you're going to be going for blinds, you want to be standing a decent distance away. Not extremely far, but the closer you are, the more perfectly accurate you have to be, which will sometimes make you inconsistent. It's also really important to know that the flashlight blinds actually kind of fade in and out whenever you're flashlighting. You don't completely stop being blinded the second they let off the flashlight. It kind of slowly fades out, and you also don't instantly become blinded. It slowly fades in. There's kind of a bit of an invisible bar, if you can imagine it, where if you let off the flashlight, the bar slowly goes down. If you put on the flashlight, the bar slowly goes up. And then at any point, if you ever become completely blind, it stays at the top for about 2 seconds and then slowly fades back down to the bottom again. This is a really important thing to keep in mind going forward, and we're going to come back to this quite a few times. The last flashlight fundamental that I want to talk about is that if you're getting a flashlight pointed at you, you can look up at any time and you will stop being blinded. So if you're ever in danger, just look up. Bam, problem solved. Okay, let's talk about some of the actual uses of flashlights now. So because it takes a whole second for the blind to kick in with a flashlight, it's kind of unrealistic to use it in an open field or pretty much at any point when the killer has free movement, because they'll easily be able to look up to avoid it and then you'll die. So instead, what you want to do is you want to use the flashlight while the killer is locked in an animation. For instance, a very common one is during pallet breaks. While the killer is breaking a pallet, you can shine a flashlight on his face, blind him. That way when the pallet break is done, he is blind for a couple seconds and you have a couple seconds to try to run away without getting caught. Although it's important to keep in mind that killer players have ears. So sometimes if you blinded a pallet, especially if you're injured, they'll hear you either through your moans of pain or through your footsteps, and sometimes they can track you even while blind. And what ends up happening is you lose out on the distance that you could have got by just running away by standing there and blinding, so they get even more distance on you than they should. The other common animation that's blinded on is vaulting windows. If you're not a tier 3 Myers or someone that can vault windows extremely fast, you can get blinded during the animation, which can be sometimes good as a survivor if you're trying to lose track of the killer. There are a couple exceptions to this rule though. For some reason, Spirit actually can avoid being blinded at pallet breaks and window vaults if she looks up in time, and same thing with Hag. If you're playing against a Hag, she can look up if she's breaking a pallet before you can actually get the blind. This is because the animations make it so that they look at the ground for a longer period of time, which doesn't give you the FOV that you need to get the blind. Chainsaw killers also break pallets extremely fast, and you should probably not try to blind a killer while they're trying to chainsaw a pallet either, because this will usually end up in death. Okay, so moving right along to chain blinding. Now this goes back to where I said earlier about how blinds work and how they slowly fade in and fade out. Basically, if you know the timing of how long someone stays blind, you can take advantage of the fact that it slowly fades out, and if you can catch the bar while it's still high, it takes way less flashlight to get the blind. So if you apply the flashlight to the killer, the second that it starts to fade away, he'll instantly become blind again, and it'll lock in for another 2 seconds, and then so on and so forth. You can rinse, repeat, and you can save a lot of your flashlight this way. Instead of just holding your flashlight on the killer, you can click your flashlight at him, blind him, run away for 2 seconds, click again, blind. You basically keep him in a continuous blind. This also, however, though, is easily counterplayed by simply just looking up by the killer. So this is more something that you can do against killers that don't really know what they're doing. If a killer is kind of new or bad at the game, you can take advantage and chain blind them. But if a killer knows what they're doing, chain blinding a killer will more than likely result in death. To be perfectly honest though, I don't 100% recommend pallet blinding though. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with it. First off, it pisses off a lot of killers because they don't like being blinded, so a lot of them, you know, will tunnel you or camp you or treat you badly because of it. Second off, if the killer is actually good at the game and they know how to listen for sounds, they will just track you while they're blind anyway, and like I said before, you just lose distance that you could have gotten by just running away. And on top of all that, it wastes your flashlight charges when you could be trying to use them for flashlight saves, which we're going to cover at the end of this video. Okay, let's move on and talk about add-ons for a quick minute. So the first ones that I'll cover real quick are the grips, which increase the accuracy. These add-ons are interesting because I think they're a bit outdated from the old DVD when flashlights used to be super inaccurate. But here I'll show you a clip of a purple flashlight without any grips, which is the most inaccurate flashlight you can have. You can see that I'm not moving my mouse at all right now, but you can see that the light is kind of going up and down and it's moving around a bit on the wall. So it's not 100% steady. And now here's me holding a double grip green flashlight, which is the most accurate flashlight possible, in the exact same area, and you can see that it's not budging at all. It's just holding completely still. That's really all there is to accuracy add-ons. It's not really that big of a deal because the hitbox of the blind is so generous. It's really not that big of a deal. There are certain situations where the inaccuracy could screw you over if you happen to sway out of the hitbox, but the hitbox is pretty generous and you're not going to find these add-ons needed very often at all. The next ones we'll talk about are the ones that help the duration of the blind. These ones are pretty obvious, but I'll show you this. This is a intense halogen plus a high-end sapphire lens blind, and we'll put this side by side with a regular blind to show how much longer it lasts. It's not extremely significant, but this is also not the most powerful add-ons, and if you put on an oddball and halogen, the blind will last a while, and it can help you lose killers, but it also eats away at your flashlight really badly, so these aren't the strongest add-ons, but they definitely can be useful. The other ones I want to quickly show are the range add-ons, which are the focus lens and the high-end sapphire lens. This is just a quick refresher of what the default range is of the flashlight. We're going to use the shack wall to compare, and we'll do it with both of the add-ons now, and you can see that it barely really adds anything. Honestly, a lot of these add-ons for the flashlight don't really do a lot of anything, and I'm going to show you some of them, but the rest of them you're just going to have to take my word for it. The real main add-ons that everyone seems to use are the batteries and the filaments and the things that make your flashlight last longer, the things that can get you more uses out of them. Most of the other add-ons, you know, with the exception of the ones that make the blinds last longer, most of the other add-ons are almost borderline useless, and I could never really recommend using them at all. Some of them I can't even find out what they do. Things like the wide lens that widens your beam, I can't even tell how that benefits you. I'm sure it does do something to your flashlight, but whatever benefit it gives you is so minor that it's not ever really worth running. And the ones that you really want to be focusing on are the ones that give you more flashlight uses, as well as the ones that make the blinds last longer. Those are the strongest ones. Just real quick to cover this, because I know everyone's going to ask, and I know it's been debated in the community for so long, we're going to figure out which combinations are best for each flashlight. I'll fast forward through the parts where I am just holding it there for 20 seconds, but you can see that I started at the exact same time, frame perfect, and I can show you that the double battery, green battery plus yellow battery, works better on both the green and yellow flashlights, and then the purple flashlight is the only flashlight where green battery and yellow filament is better. Honestly though, the differences are so minor that it really doesn't matter in the end anyways. Okay, I also want to cover real quick the special interactions that Flashlight has with certain specific killers and perks. Like for instance, the most common one that people know about is burning a Wraith out of Cloak. If a Wraith is invisible or coming out of Cloak and you hold the flashlight on him, anywhere on him, doesn't matter where, his feet, his legs, his face, he will become burned and stunned for a couple seconds. This is especially easy to do while he's uncloaking because he has slower movement speed, so as long as you get him early in the animation, you should be able to get the stun pretty much every time. Although you do gotta make sure that you get it early on in the animation, because if you let the animation play too long before you start, then you're just a sitting duck and you're just gonna get hit for free. However, like every other thing with flashlights, there is counterplay to this. As Wraith, if you're in an open field and someone's trying to do this to you, you just drop back into Cloak and then juke around, and because you're so invisible, it's so hard to keep track of you at close range that survivors will almost never be able to burn you out, and you should be able to just sneak around them and uncloak and get a free hit anyway. A lot of people don't seem to know this, but you could also do this to the nurse as well. If she's charging her blink and you hold the flashlight on her, you can do the exact same thing where you burn her and it stuns her for a couple seconds. You can use this to try to help out a teammate that's getting tunneled hard by the nurse and stun her and make her stop chasing him, but keep in mind that nurse is a very, very top tier killer, and if you're playing against one that's even semi-decent, she's probably just going to turn around and kill your ass, so this is a very, very risky play and generally not very useful, nowhere near as useful as the Wraith burn. The real important information to know is that holding a flashlight on a nurse at any point before she's blinked actually takes away the prompt to blink, and she can't blink. So you can use this to keep her from blinking, as well as denying her chain blinks after she blinks one time. This, again, like every other flashlight trick on a nurse, is extremely risky, and if you can manage to pull it off, it's a pretty funny thing that you can do to mess around with killers, but nurses are scary, and if you're playing against a good nurse, a lot of the times you're just going to find yourself dying while you're trying to do this. However, if you're feeling brave, or if you're really just wanting to help out a teammate that seems to be getting tunneled by the nurse, you can do some of these things to help them out, but just keep in mind that there is a big risk involved, so just proceed with caution. The last killer-specific interaction is with Hag. Hag's traps can actually be revealed and broken with the flashlight. This actually helps a ton because usually with Hag traps, the only thing that you can do is crouch walk over them to not set them off, or just set them off and pray for the best. But this adds a whole new depth to the gameplay and allows you to do something else, which is flashlighting them, breaking them, and then not having to worry about it anymore at all. The other thing I want to cover in this section is Lightborn, which is absolutely redunculous. They buffed this recently to be 80%, so the blinds now take 5 seconds, which basically means that you're just immune to flashlights. During no animation are you anywhere near stuck in place for 5 seconds, so unless there's like 3 survivors all trying to blind you at the same time, you're probably going to never get blinded if you put on this perk. Here in the clip, it shows you just how ridiculously long you have to hold the flashlight in the killer's face to get the blind. It's absolutely overkill, to be honest, but if for some reason you just want to disregard everything in this video and never have to worry about flashlights ever again, you can run this perk. Although I will admit, I would suggest not running it and instead learning the counterplay to free up a perk slot for more useful things. Alright, time to cover the thing that most people are probably here for, which is the flashlight save timing. Just to quickly cover this so that you guys can understand it, basically, during the pickup animation, the killer is immune to stuns from flashlights and dropping survivors. So if you do it a little bit too early, what happens is that you get the blind while the killer is still in the animation. He's immune to dropping, so he can just look up and walk away. And if you do it too late, then he's able to look away from the flashlight before the actual blind kicks in. So the idea behind this is that you want to time your flashlight so that the second that the killer is able to freely move is also the same second that the blind kicks in, so he doesn't have any time to look away, but he's also not officially in the animation. That way it'll save the survivor and the killer won't be able to do anything about it. Okay, so I think the best way to teach this to you guys is to teach you when in the animation you actually start blinding. So every killer has the same general animation where they pick a survivor up from the ground to their knee, and then they go from the knee to the shoulder. So if you can see here, I'll slow it down. The timing is that you start flashlighting basically about a half a second after they start getting forward momentum. So you'll notice they're at the knee and then he starts to lift them up. About a half a second after they start getting forward momentum is when you want to start using the flashlight. Blinds are actually client side as well, so ping does not matter. If you're on higher ping, it might show you pulling out your flashlight later, but as long as you're pressing M2 at the right time, it'll work every single time no matter what the ping is. Keep in mind though that this timing is very precise, and if you're even just a split second early or late, it won't work. So this is going to take a lot of practice, and you're going to get a lot of times where you think you're getting it right, but you're not, just because you're a little bit too early or late. Unfortunately, there is no one golden rule that will make this work 100% of the time, and it does require practice in the end. But you can review the last 1 or 2 minutes of this video over and over again to get the timing down so that you know at least what you're aiming for. Quick editor's note, while I was making this video, the Demogorgon came out on PTB, and his timing is actually a little bit different. As you can see in this clip, I do the correct timing that is for every other killer, and it is actually a little bit too late. His animation is a little bit weird, and for him, the timing is just a slight bit earlier than the rest. I know this is kind of confusing, and I'm sorry to throw this in last minute, but it looks like if you're going to be playing against a Demogorgon, you're going to have to adjust your timing by like a little bit, just a little bit earlier. I also want to throw out there that because of what we talked about earlier with the blind and how there's like an invisible bar that fills up, if you know that you started your blind a little bit earlier on the pickup, you can let go of your flashlight for a second and then start it again. And that bar will go down a very slight amount and then immediately start filling up again, which can fix your timing a lot of the time. This works very, very often. You'd be surprised how many times blinds work where you do it a little bit too early, then you just adjust, and then you end up getting the blind. Along with this is also chain blinding. If you do get the blind early during the animation and the killer doesn't look up or look away, you can just hold the flashlight in his face and the second blind will kick in instantly and he won't have a chance to look away. Experienced killers won't usually fall for this. They'll know to either look up or look away, but it's pretty good to go for it because there's no really risk involved and there's a pretty good chance that you can just get the chain blind and get the save anyway, even though you messed up the timing. In a realistic game scenario, however, the counterplay to this is very, very easy. As a killer, this is exactly what you don't want to do, where you just pick up a survivor without really being aware of your surroundings or really trying to do anything to counterplay it. There's a lot of easy things you can do, like for instance, if you have them down near a wall, you can face that wall, and the survivor won't be able to get the blind because your FOV will be dug into the wall as opposed to being out in the open. Do be careful though, because elevation does not affect blinds, so if you try to use something like a hill or something where they can be above and below you, that won't block it. They'll still be able to blind you. Even in an open field though, it's very easy to just face the opposite direction of the flashlighter if you know where he is, and he won't be able to get a flashlight save because the pickup animations are so fast these days. For instance, this shows you how close you even have to be to even attempt to get the save, and even these aren't close enough. It's pretty insane. Like if you just turn away from the survivor with a flashlight, you basically get a guaranteed pickup. Also, on top of this, if you know that there's people in your game that are going for flashlight saves, you can bait the pickup by standing over the survivor and standing still for a second, and then turning around and looking around. And you'll often find the survivors running to get into a good position to go for the flashlight save, and a lot of the times you can get free downs from this. So we covered the default pickup, which is what you'll run into about 90 to 95% of the time, but there are some other animations that we can talk about too. For instance, you actually can save somebody that's getting pulled out of a locker, although this is very difficult because there's very few lockers in the game that actually give you the angle to do it, but it is possible, and if you could get a save like this, it is freaking sick. So the timing for this is kind of similar to the other one where you gotta wait about a half a second after the cue. Basically, the cue is once the survivor hits the killer's shoulder, you want to wait about a half a second and then start blinding. These are very sketchy though because there's a lot of obstacles that can block your beam, like the locker doors or walls, and a lot of the times the beam won't be directly on the killer's face the entire time. So these are very hard, very inconsistent, but if you do happen to find yourself in a situation where you have an opportunity to go for one, this is the timing. It's not going to be that useful, but it's nice to know. So if you're interested in learning this, I would just say review these clips and then hope do your best to, I guess, replicate it. The only other grab animation there is the one where you either pull someone off of a generator or maybe a vault. And the animations are all the same, but the timing is slightly different from the default pickup, so we'll talk about them real quick as well. The timing for this is kind of hard to explain because it's right in the middle of the animation between the knee and the shoulder, so it's kind of hard to really explain it, but if you see from the clips here, it's basically like during the animation, right as he's coming up to the shoulder, before he actually gets put on the shoulder though, is when you want to start holding the flashlight, and then it'll work every single time. This is another one that comes from a little bit of practice, but you can just know that it's slightly later than the default pickup animation, so whatever timing you would normally use, if you could just wait about a half a second later and then start blinding, that is pretty much what will work every single time. This and the locker one are both not exactly the most important to learn because there's very few situations you'll get in that where this will become useful, whereas the pickups are very common, but it's still a fun thing to learn regardless. Alright guys, and I think that's about all there is to say about flashlights. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and watching this video. I hope you guys learned a thing or two. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave it a like, as well as subscribe to the channel because I'll have even more tutorials coming your way soon once I find some time to work on them. So thank you guys so much. If you guys have anything to say, let me know in the comments, and I hope you guys enjoy Go have some fun messing with killers. Have a good rest of your night. I'm out of here. See ya. Take care. See ya. I'm out of here. See ya. Take care. See ya.